Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to hear this presentation. I hope the sound works okay. And the topic of this presentation is a little pretentious or sounds very good, but I need to say that besides working in different institutions, where I work right now, which is the Supercomputing Center in Spain, which is more known as Barcelona Supercomputing Center. This is a center where we have a multidisciplinary philosophy, as you can see now, and that offers us, or it offers me, something that is very attractive. We have a great opportunity to learn new things, and for me, the 2 years I've been working there, it's been a great pleasure to be able to learn a lot of things that I didn't know about computing and data, working with data, and even more so realizing the things I still need to learn about this in the next 20 years till I get till I can be retired. But that's a moving target in Europe now, so I don't know if it will take 20 years. Let me see now. Okay, I jumped very far, but our center that you will see as BCC in the slides, well, the slides will be written in English. I'm sorry about this. And this center was open in 2005 and now has 470 employees. This is a center that was created mainly for research, but with a technology component that weighted a lot. This is really the supercomputing National Center that not only offers supercomputing but also supports so that European and Spanish researchers can have access to machines that are top of at the age. And it's sponsored by the state and a department of the Catalonia department, which this is a government of the region, of the Catalonia region, and also is located in the Polytechnic or Polytechnical University of Catalonia. The structure of this BSc has 5 departments, which are technical and scientific, and a very big computer sciences department with 200 or plus people that work with a variety of different problems, from hardware to software. And they not only work in research projects, but also public projects with different companies that are very well known. There's a computer applications for science and engineering, and a life sciences department that focuses even more so in studying the genome for different species, and an operations department that is in charge of offering support to all the researchers in the center, and also hosts the Mare Nostrum 3 machine that we have here, which it has a 1.1 petaflop and has about 50,000 cores. And this will be substituted next year with a machine that we hope to have an 8 petaflops capacity. So the hardware that we have and need to take advantage of is a very big machine. And of course, we need to justify its existence, not only us, but all the researchers that use supercomputing in Spain and Europe. And we have different programs in Spain that make it easier to fulfill this task. In particular, this is the Spanish supercomputing network that offers free hours to researchers to use these computers. And our department is the Earth Sciences department. And I am speaking about this is prominent in this slide. Its main role is to do environmental modeling and forecasting. And particularly, we focus in problems linked to air quality and climate change. And we're focusing 4 groups, and I will explain now what is the use in our particular case that we do of high performance computers and also analysis and data process. For us, this is a working group that is, it's basic, it's very important. This is a group that translates what we do in the climate group or air quality or computers, and this is capable of developing tools that allow the society and the industry the uses of what we do. This is important because in Europe, the European Commission, that is a bigger sponsor of research nowadays, they prioritize projects, and here I am including a multitude of different tools that are managed by this commission. So they prioritize those projects that are able to prove that they have a use, or there's a use in their research. They don't stop funding basic research, but they are prioritizing those research that they have a use in the public and private sector. There's a climate forecasting group that uses a global model for the climate, and it's more geared to predicting subseasonal and decadal climate prediction. And there's a group for atmospheric composition that is geared more to air quality problems, urban and continental, and a support group of more or less 17 engineers that support other groups and also develop their own research in problems related to the efficiency of the codes that we are using, even more for the meteorologist models or air quality ones. So even before we go more in depth, speaking about the problems that we face, I would like to use a conceptual slide regarding our environment. This slide shows in a box a representation of a model that is doing simulations and different experiments, and we can consider that those experiments are done using the ensemble forecasting, and this model needs an input, and they give us an output that needs to be disseminated or it needs to be analyzed, and we also have problems that are associated to visualize the results of this simulation, and this is all encompassed in a workflow that is quite linear. This starts with the input, ends with the outputs, and has some simulations around here. And all of this is done in an environment where we have things that manage the tasks and problems also associated to the simulations, and problems that are associated to the hardware that we use for the simulation. So this kind of picture corresponds to the traditional environment where we have been developing the modeling and data analysis in our community. Recently, things have been or started to change, and we find a little bit more complex problems. We have, for example, problems linked to the generation of initial conditions in the simulations that we do, and a lot of other work groups do around the world. So this analytics problems has to do with the pre-process of the observations prior to doing the simulation of the data. We also have problems linked to the volume of the output that is generated by our simulations. So we find that a lot of the times the analysis of the simulations takes longer than the simulation per se. So it's ridiculous when we increase the resolution of the models that we're using. So We also have other analytics tools that we start using when we do experiments with groups that go over the 50 items or 100 items for the simulation. Maybe we don't want to do those simulations up until the end because we don't want to use all our computer capacity using 100 members because we want to explore all the space that gives us an uncertainty in the results that we are analyzing. So we want to do an analysis of the simulations while they are running so that we can put aside those that are less interesting and give us less information to the cluster of simulations that we're doing. This kind of problems need or require new algorithms and need to be reviewed the way we engage with experiments. Even situations that are more complex, if we take into account that the observations that were used as an input in the past, let's say control stations for air quality that are in situ, that are in the middle of a park, or the meteorologic station in a park, those are added or been enhanced with a better quality sensors that are used as control, as a routine. So these sensors nevertheless have important information because there are quite a lot of them and they can give us high frequency information. So nonetheless, this information is not useful. We don't need to store all of this. And it's probable that before we do this, we will like to filter it because then it gives us a analytics problem. This is even more interesting when we are interested in the real-time simulation. When we want to simulate what is going on right now, we have the forecasting problem. And also we find situations where the visualization is so complex that we need to do a filtering and an analysis before we can show to the researcher or the public what we're working on. With this, we don't have the traditional problem where we have a simulation and a model that is done in a machine, but it gets more complex and requires that this traditional workflow that we used to have stops being linear, and now it has a lot of other components that had to do not only with the simulation of the Navier-Stokes equations, but also a data processing while those simulations are being done. So with that overview, I'd like to show or share with you some problems we're working on, and I'll speak about each of the teams that compose the department. And this team, the atmospherical team, have to do with weather problems and the prediction of the quality of air with temporal scales that are a little bit short, maybe 8 to 72 hours. In particular, we developed a system that is known as Calliope, and this is a air quality prediction system in 72 hours that it's used for all Europe. And we also have a higher resolution window over the Spaniard or Iberic Peninsula. The system that started to be operational, and with this I mean that every day has given us a forecast from 2011. It's been validated and it's been improved since then, and its results are available online, not only in a graphic way but also through figures in the BSC portal. This is a very popular portal, and we now have a mobile application. It was awarded in Europe as the most open access application for this kind of problems that has been done in the continent. The system is very popular, and the channels of for broadcasting the climate and is used regularly in different TV channels, even more so when we have contamination or pollution peaks, even more in Madrid, Barcelona. During the winter, we have problems that are associated with nitrogen dioxide particles. So with this, we have a great visibility thanks to a great effort we've done, not only to perform experiments with a modeling system of the atmosphere, but also developing a operational prediction system. Now we have opened new channels to be able to access to society, and it has to do with the initial idea where a great majority of our research is motivated by the user's needs, and we move more towards that focus. So we identify a need, and from the scientific point of view and technical point of view, we try to see how we can solve that need. And this Calliope system in Spain has been one of these kind of answers. As a response to a collaboration that started some 2 years ago, with SEDEMA here in Mexico City, taking into account the complexity of weather in this area, and also the emissions that we have in the metropolitan areas in Mexico, which are quite high. Only in the city we have 86,000 million of kilometers traveled by car, which is unthinkable in a metropolitan area in Europe. So we decided to work with SEDENA to develop a system that would be similar to Calliope but adapted to Mexico in such a way that would be an operational system operated by a Mexican institution. So this system is validated by the monitoring or air quality monitoring network of SEDENA, and is available in its beta version, and we hope that next year we can pass all the knowledge to SEDENA so that they can operate it not only to predict air quality for your area, but as a complement for public information regarding air quality and the impact of the potential measures for reducing pollutants species. Now, the effort that we did doesn't stop only with developing a system as Calliope, but in an association with INCEP, the weather system in the U.S., and basing us in the regional climate system that is used by INCEP, we've developed a atmospherical chemistry module that is coupled online to this model. That atmospheric chemical model resolves the gas phase formulas, and it has the advantage that the same model with the same online chemical or chemistry coupled allows us to do multi-scale in a urban and a regional scale, which is a very powerful tool, not only to be able to do research or experiments, but also forecasting with a better certainty and a better resolution of the interactions between weather or meteorology and atmospherical chemistry. Nonetheless, the mesoscalar models that are used to solve air quality problems has a limitation, and this limitation does not allow it to reach resolutions lesser than 1 kilometer. Even 500 meters is quite far. So this graph belongs to the map of Barcelona. This is the Mediterranean Sea. We have the port, and here are the hills. So this is a map that shows the concentration of nitrogen dioxide in the city in a given day. So the system that we currently have for air quality prediction has a resolution of 1 kilometer. So simplifying that, or that would mean that in a grid of a kilometer that we use currently, that would correspond to this area that is between this white box, we have a greater complexity. We know at the street level, situation is even more complex than what a traditional air quality model could tell us about. We have great avenues with a lot of traffic, and we have small streets where we practically don't have any traffic, or maybe it's people are walking there, and we have parks. So it's a great complexity that include gradients, important gradients of density, of the density of this species. So what we're working on now is collaborating with other BCC department to develop a computation of fluid dynamics that will solve the equations in such a way that we can work in scales of even 10 meters in cities as Barcelona, and where we would couple the atmospheric chemistry that we've developed with NCEP collaboration to do forecasting in a urban area. The challenge now is not only a modeling problem, but it's even more complex when we want to work in very small space scales. We find problems as are we going to validate the simulations? How are we going to validate the predictions? Because we don't have observations at the level of one side of the street to the other. The air quality network measurement does not have that density, and we also don't have the information about real-time emissions because we need them for a forecast, and at the street level we cannot treat the emissions in this avenue in the same way as we would treat them in this street. This is a small street, and then we find a problem that implies great scale treatment of data, and we've focused on how to develop an emission model that would be able to adapt to this kind of space or spatial scales. The aspect we're working on is the data capturing, the streaming. How do we get real-time data that will measure the variables? Even if they are not the variables that we need in this model, we can use as proxies. And we have solutions that consist of placing on top of the buses some sensors that are expensive, and obviously we cannot place so many. And we can also use systems that are based on the voluntary sharing the traffic by the citizens, and we also are using the taxis. So taxis are also reporting where they are located, and we know the type of vehicle, and we can identify them in a frequency of every second. So all that information is available. Also the information related to the ships that are in the port. So 20% of the emissions in Barcelona come from the port. They are not related to traffic. So all that kind of information, we need to gather it in real time. So we started a project with Cisco company to start working on how to reduce the information that we're going to gather from all those channels. So to give you an idea, if we have 10,000 vehicles reporting in the city, and in the city we have even more than that quantity, and those 10,000 vehicles report with 10 hertz, so 10 times per second, and they only inform about 10 variables about the state that they're in. We find that the fleet would give us 30 megabytes of data per day. Excuse me, that would be the 10 variables, and we multiply it by 10 vehicles, we will have 300 gigabytes per day only with this kind of sensors. So the problem that we're finding now is not only where to store this information, which that would be enough of a problem when we start to multiply it by 365 days per year. But even more so, how do we keep the communication channels unsaturated in the channels of the city? Because we're going to use free channels. We don't want to pay to use a network. So this is the kind of problems that we're working with Cisco. One of the tools that we're working on is installing the distributed sensors around the city that could do a pre-processing of all this information before it gets sent to the BSC for its use. And this needs to be as timely as it can be, so we can use this information in real time for air quality prediction. So taking into account also that we have many more possible sensors as mobile devices, let's say, and we need to solve the problem of computing before transmission. So having those boxes or those transmission systems that we are aiming to install throughout the city needs to be able not only to receive the information but also process it and condense it. So other thing related to air quality that we work on in the department is the prediction of storms, dust storms. So collaborating with the weather service of the state, we work and we host 2 regional centers for dust prediction for Northern Africa, Europe, and Asia. So here is where these dust storms are very severe and have an important impact in air quality, even more in the Saharan Africa. There it has a great impact over cities. Population that is sensitive to breathing problems. Now, predictions that we do in this these 2 centers that are regionals, gather all the predictions that are done through all the world and distribute them with a unified format in a graphic way and in a numeric way. And the other center, what it's done is that it does predictions that are specific for a kind of identified users. Let's say for health, even more in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Middle East and Europe. And this is done through the model that I've previously shared with you, where the chemistry is coupled online. So it's the NMMB BSC. So regarding climate, we work with slightly different tools. We are part of a consortium that develops a model that is called BCF, which is the European model, which would be the equivalent of BS, or the model that it's done in the US. So this is only run in Europe. It's not public. And BSC, it is a public one, but the country, it's a state and member of Europe, so institutions have the opportunity to join this group. This model is one that has an atmospheric component and an ocean component. So this is a very common common model, which is NEMO. So it has a marine component and a ground component and vegetation. And we also use that global model that simulates weather for the planet to solve problems, as I said, predicting climate, especially for predicting subseasonal and seasonal decadal. Subseasonal is how we're to tell the weather in 2 weeks or even 2 months, and seasonal are those models that try to predict what is going to happen in the next following months. And this in particular try to predict the evolution of El Nino and other things. And the decadal one is quite recent, that tries to estimate what is the evolution of the climate change in temporal scales that are very tight, maximum 30 years. But these are the scales that we are sensitive to, even more related to temperature. So these problems imply have a good estimation of the starting conditions of the system in a worldwide scale, and also have an estimation of what is going to be the estimation of the external effects. Let's say the greenhouse effect is anthropogenically, and also gases or aerosol as volcano related. And also in the model we need to take into account the factors to do simulations and experiments and climate forecasting in any of these temporal scales. Now, problems that we're interested in are shown through this slide. This shows us the maximum levels of temperature and for 2015. In pink, we have those areas of the planet that experimented a maximum temperature regarding the last 37 years in 2015. And you know that in the global temperature in 2015, we registered the maximum temperature in the series that is registered since 1875. In particular, this system is used using the series of the NASA and the anomalies of a 1 degree. So this takes us halfway regarding the goal that we set in the COP of Paris, which was 2 degrees. But even more so, regionally, the situation is a lot more complex. And that's where we're trying to show with this slide. We have a lot of areas like in the center of Europe and the Iberian Peninsula in the south of Mexico and Baja California, where we registered that this year was the hotter one in the last 37. We also have areas in the planet where, for example, the subpolar of the Arctic, North Arctic, we registered the lower temperature in the last 37 years. So the climate change, it's a more complex problem that we can imagine, or what the average temperature, global temperature tells us. And it has a very complex structure, and we can imagine if we don't only imagine the anthropogenic factors, but also variability in the area. So those kind of phenomena are important because, for example, in Europe, we have an increase in temperatures in 2015. And those of us that are interested in predicting this kind of things, we do it with this kind of experiments. So these experiments, even though they are predicting or forecasting experiments where we want to tell what is going to happen in the future, require predictions that are done for all the previous years, where we have initial conditions. And the reason why we also do backcasting or hindcast is because we need to calibrate the system. We know that this has systematic problems that are very important, so we need those hindcasts so we can calibrate the predictions and correct the systematic error towards the future, and to estimate the quality of the estimations in the same way that we assess the quality of weather predictions. And we also use a cluster prediction, or prediction by clusters, and these clusters are a minimum of 10. So with this, each time we initialize or we start the model with perturbations that are slightly smaller in the initial conditions so we generate this cluster using what we really know about the weather, that it's not linear and that it's quite sensitive to small disturbances in the initial conditions. And all the experiment altogether, it implies that we not only need to take into account the computational cost of what we did, for example, for 2016, or if we started for 2017. But we also need to take into account the cost linked to the hindcasts for the last 30 to 50 years. And when we put this all together in an extreme case where we are predicting the decadal prediction into the future with clusters of at least 10 members and starting as a minimum in 1960, we find that a single experiment will require 5,500 years of simulation with the coupled model. So I'll speak a little bit more about the problems linked to this kind of experiments. The kind of information now that we extract from the simulations, and in particular in this case of station or seasonal experiments, and this is something that we did with EC Earth, is to be able to respond to problems as such as what is the predictivity or the forecasting or the skill that we have in order to forecast the temperature extremes for the next season in areas where temperatures are increasing, as in Europe and the north of Africa, and even more so to try to understand what are the responsible processes for the positive skill when we find that positive skill. And in the case of this kind of problems, what we tried to do was not only work with means, stational or seasonal means, which is simple, but to work with everyday information of all the members and all these years and months in which we develop the prediction or the forecasting. This kind of problem implies starting to work with files that could have from 20 and 50 gigabytes, each one of them. So if we want to find a response in a reasonable time and without needing to have a machine to do the processing that would have a terabyte of memory, what we find is we try to start thinking on how to do this faster and in a more efficient way. Traditionally, this kind of analysis are done offline. I do my simulation, I store my files, and if, for example, I'm interested on the semi-5 Boyle repository experiments, ISGF, and I download all the data, which takes quite a bit of time, and then I start to use any other machine that I have available to get a solution. So then we have ways of handling these problems that require an initial effort, but allows us to save in the space that we need to store the result. By 2, we can save it, and it allows us to store these results online while the experiment is running in the machine. We need to be sure that our diagnosis analysis are run in parallel, and they can run in the same node that the simulation is being on, in such a way that the analysis and the simulations are done in parallel. Another kind of problems that we solve are the attribution models. Not the anomaly or climate observed anomalies attribution problems, as in this case, the maximum coverage of ice in the Arctic in 2014, but other kinds of phenomena, as it could be the reduction of ice in the Arctic area. And we handle this problem not only considering that these phenomena are produced due to anthropogenic phenomena, but also we ask what is the role of natural variability in the generation of this kind of situation. In this particular case, the 2014 case, we couldn't attribute the maximum of Arctic ice in the Antarctic in 2014 to an anthropogenic origin or reason, but the only source that we can attribute this anomaly to in a secure way is a change in the atmospheric circulation patterns through the Antarctic, plus a preconditioning of the superficial layer of the ocean due to the sweet water transport from the continent. This kind of problems are the ones where we solve with this global EC Earth model that I spoke about. This model is run in its standard configuration that has about 100 kilometers of resolution, but now we've started to work with a new configuration of a little bit of a higher resolution that we use in a normal way, which is 25 times more costly in terms of computation problems, but it has a better resolution worldwide and presents some advantages in terms of skill and reproduction of the observed climate. And we're working on a new configuration that consists of a new atmospheric module that we are developing, collaborating with the European Center of Predictions or Forecasting in the midterm, and we are coupling a NEMO configuration that is global, that goes to 8 kilometers. It would allow us to have a global model to do predictions and simulations of about 10 kilometers at a world scale. So just before we speak about things that are more related to the challenges in terms of computation and data analysis power, I wanted to highlight this problem of channel prediction that I previously mentioned, this basic experiment of channel prediction, and this is not the only one that is being decided for CMIC 6. It requires 5,000 simulated years for the coupled model. So if we reduce the variables that are stored to the maximum, it requires 1.4 petabytes for space for storing this data, and this figure is even more interesting. It requires 200 million hours to be able to do all of the simulations. So 200 million hours, so you get an idea of it. It's a third part of all the hours that our supercomputer is capable of producing. So we need to have a very good reason to justify that we can use the machine to do this. So we've still not found that reason, but we're working on it. So the computational air sciences group related to environment is the group that allows us to face this kind of problems. How do we justify the use of 200 million hours without being blamed of misusing that resource? So this group is organized in different teams. One is geared to the code efficiency. They take the codes of air quality and climate, and continuously they are performing experiments to accelerate that code using the hardware that is available, not only in our supercomputer, but also in other machines in the US and Europe. There is a group that is focused on developing the environment where these models will be developed or are developed. And a very important thing is the development of workflow tools. When we're speaking about doing experiments for predicting air quality every day at a given time, and being certain that we have redundancy in the system, human factor is quite dangerous or risky. We need to try to avoid it as much as we can. And the only way we can do this kind of tasks is automatizing the process and making sure that we have a very well-defined workflow and a series of dependencies between the tasks that are done automatically. So we do need the human factor to develop this workflow, but in our particular case, we're trying to have the least amount of interventions where we are running an experiment in such a way that not only allows us to undertake experiments in a faster way and in a safety-era way, but also a PhD can launch an experiment without having to suffer the trauma experience of compiling with Intel 15 or with Intel 14 when the pointers were designed for Intel 12. So those kind of experiences, I don't wish it to anybody or any other PhD student. So if you want to try to convince your boss that this kind of investment is really it's going to really give a return, and that means peace of mind. That return is peace of mind and more time to be able to publish your articles. That is an investment that does not require so much time, but it does require a collaboration with software engineers, with people that are not around us. They're not in the physicists or traditional sciences departments, and it requires to work with them hand in hand and find a way to communicate that is common to both. And there's another group that is geared to the development of diagnostics and to face those problems as how to do those diagnoses online when a domain is running of the experiment that is done with a global model. And the data filing using the least amount of compression that we're able to accept. But I want to highlight this. In our case, and I think I mentioned it in the beginning of this presentation, that we're lucky in BSc to have multidisciplinary teams where we have from people developing process or processing in the same working area, that we have a physicist that is developing a parameterization of the climate model, or a communicator that is focused on trying to translate everything we do to put them on pamphlets or flyers that can be distributed for public domain. So this is possible only when people know each other and can speak the same language. And that language takes time to develop, but requires a collaboration spirit and goodwill, even more so, which I don't doubt you do have that goodwill. But normally we consider it something given, and it's way harder than we think of to really use it or to really apply it. So also, working with efficiency of codes, even besides doing that this is our responsibility. So I've mentioned before that 200 million hours figure is, and that is translated into two things: money and the cost that the depreciation of the machine is implied, and energy. So only in some exceptions, the energy that is given to a machine is green, but normally it does result in emissions. So trying to make our model running faster with least amount of resources, it's a way of being committed with the environment. This kind of work is done testing what is the capacity that we have, not only to develop experiments in a machine as Mare Nostrum 3, the super machine that we have that you're using typical processing power like Intel or traditional interconnections, and we are comparing what is the capacity that we have in order for us to do calculations in this machine with less traditional machines and more difficult to use, as in this case Mont Blanc, that is a prototype that is being developed in the BSc and uses ARM processors as we have in the mobiles. These are the same, but in order to make them cheaper, they are older. So the advantage of these processors is that they are done with low memory and low frequency. But these are processors that use less amount of energy. So if we use a machine of this kind in a reasonable way, which can happen, we can have at least a 10 times factor in the savings of energy. Of course, this is not for free, so one of our responsibilities is to communicate the benefit of this kind of investment in research for the society. We want to do air quality research and also related with the reduction or adaptation to climate change, but we want to do it with a sense, with logical sense. We want to know what is the cost associated to this experimentation that we're doing. So the equivalent to this would be the philosophy that is being adopted in biology nowadays to try to reduce the kind of animal tests done or animal testing done. So the ocean model that we use is, and a standard one is called NEMO, as I mentioned before, and it's written in 1490 and it used an MPI paradigm. It is not adapted for open MP, and it has more than 170,000 lines of code. This is a model that we're not going to rewrite in Europe today. So the only possibility that we have is to work over the model and try to modify or do some modifications that will make it more efficient. And this kind of modifications are done in the BSC in our department. First of all, doing a performance analysis of the efficiency of the code, and doing that analysis and using a series of tools that are related, so are kind of a standard in the computer sciences world. We were able to prove that only 20% of the time that the module was in the node was only used for the calculations. The rest of the time, or majority of it, was geared to communication, global communications, and those are more costly if we have a greater resolution of the model, because we will use more nodes in order to do the simulation. In particular, with the new configuration that we use at 25Ks, that configuration has 68 million points to solve the equations. And this kind of experiment is done using a minimum of 150 nodes. And for this, we start to see the problem linked to communication. So it's this latency of communication through the different nodes. So what we did is to analyze the node and try to see which were the parts of the node that were slowing down the simulations, because they were doing communications that, to our judgment, were unnecessary. So identifying those kind of communications, we saw that we could do a packaging of some of the MPI messages that were done, and we saw that some of the softwares the model uses were doing a checking of the convergency of the software that was highly unnecessary, and reducing that checking, we could reduce the communications. And we need to keep in mind that each software checking, a lot of them require a global communication of the results of all the points for a single node where this analysis is done. And another of the problems was the reordering of the communication. So what we tried to do was to have communications more tied together as we could between the code, and doing this kind of analysis and the modifications to it, something that took us about a year to do. We were able to go from having a cost linked to the original code, that you can see it here. You can see the amount of cores used for the simulation that would imply a cost, as we can see here, and the savings associated to each of the modifications done to the code are seen in green in these bars associated to the optimized code. So in a way that is easier to see this kind of savings, particularly for the configuration that we're using, the 25 kilometers. What we could see is that we had a saving from the original version, that is this curve here, and we were finding an acceleration of the code in a simulation of approximately a 60%, only working with the communications of the code. And we have other kind of optimizations that we can do, and that would benefit us, not only because we will save calculation time, but also because the response to the response or the solution of the experiment will be given faster, because the simulation will run for at least less amount of time. So we don't only work on the code itself. A majority of our codes are coupled for air quality and also for climate or for weather. And one of the problems that we had was coupling. Normally, two modules coupled use different grids. In particular, this happens between atmosphere and ocean. And because the grids are different and the atmosphere needs to read temperatures of the ocean surface, this requires an interpolation every time that the atmosphere needs to read the results of the simulation of the ocean. This interpolation requires communication and requires that this interpolation is as efficient as it can be, always taking into account that we need to keep the mass and energy in each of those communications. Temperatures do not need to be kept, but extensive variables do need to be kept in the communication. So working with the coupler among the ocean and the atmosphere, we could find a saving in the EC Earth, the climate model, of 40%. Only rationalizing those communications that were given between the atmosphere and the ocean. So, being mindful of time, I wanted to highlight the importance of workflows. This diagram represents an experiment of data simulation using the ensemble Kalman filter to get initial conditions of aerosols or sprays in this kind of models, BCF. And the ensemble Kalman filter is a method for assimilating data, and as his name expresses, it uses the approximation of clusters or sets. So every assimilation filter has a series of simulations, and in this case are among 10 and 30 that are done in a parallel way and communicate every time they finish the simulation cycle to be able to rescale the disturbances generated. And each of the simulations, you have them here, and you also have at the end of each simulation a convergence of the tasks or the information of each of the tasks in order to do the scaling of the disturbances. And once again, you have a simulation, a rescale, a simulation, and a rescale, and consecutively. And when we have this kind of profile, this kind of experiment profile, and this is not the most complex one, it's the only one that fit the slide. So what we find is that any manual intervention in this kind of experiments, it's geared to the generation of errors that will be multiplied. So the fact of having a workflow, and in this case, we used an internal tool that we've generated, and it's available in PyPy and GitHub, and it's called AutoSubmit. In this researcher, what he only needs is to define the experiment in a configuration file, and the workflow manager will be in charge of not only launching the experiment in this machine that the researcher chooses, but also do a continuous monitoring of the tasks that are being done and launching those that are being fulfilled and relaunch those that are failed, maybe because we had a communication or node problem. So once again, this is maybe one of the most profitable investments that we've done in the department. So I think I'm going to skip and go to the conclusions. But before that, I wanted to give a message related with the services group. This diagram was done in a European project that we participated in, the Euporias, and this is a climate services development project. And one of the conclusions and the main axis or the core of this project is the concept that data is not information, and users, what they want is information. They don't want data. So how do we go from what we typically have been doing, which is giving data to users, to really giving them the information they need? That requires some intermediaries that normally we haven't had in our environment, in the centers that we've been working in. So in the same way that software engineers are benefited by working in the same area that the modelers and the researchers for air quality work. These researchers are benefited when they work with experts in marketing and psychologists, etc. Not to sell what we do, but to be able to communicate to society what we're doing. And really show that something that we're convinced about, that what we do is useful, that is worth funding. Because if we don't, the funders will look other way, and there's a lot of other things that are more important to fund if we don't communicate this. So the services group, as I mentioned, is geared to transferring the technology of the work with you. It's in charge of transferring knowledge that we have regarding climate or air quality, and the knowledge that we have and the work that we do with wind energy companies in Europe and North America in terms of the use of climate forecasting, and in particular the seasonal predictions. And we have a portal where we gather all the information about seasonal predictions for tropical cyclones. Once again, this is an adventure that we undertook with a company. This is a Excel Capling. It's an insurance company, and we work with Colorado State and also with the European Union for seasonal forecasting for the crops, even more for food safety. This is the last slide, and so I thank you for being patient and staying here and not falling asleep. So what I did wanted to mention, and I mentioned this throughout the presentation, but I think it's important to highlight, is that research is changing. We've changed in Europe. We have no other way. Young people do not do a researcher career that previously we had 25 years experience. Nowadays it's different. We find now that basic research is an exception. It's an exception. And what we find is that research is now geared to the user. This does not mean that we have basic problems that would need to be solved, but we do need to make sure that the user, the taxpayers, really know what we're doing and why this is important. Maybe it's not useful in the short run. Maybe the cosmology research is not important, but it's important for the human being, and it's important and crucial to be able to communicate that message. And education in the era of open data and open knowledge, it's unavoidable. There's so many opportunities regarding education, and it's something that is unavoidable and we need to take advantage of. We also find a great heterogeneity. The group of physicists that used to work alone, isolated in their labs, I think that's over. Now I'm speaking about European workflow. We are now working with multidisciplinary groups that don't need to be in the same site, but they need to be connected or communicated. And I'm also including aspects as arts and social sciences. We need standards. When we speak about heterogeneity and communication, we need to speak the same language. And these standards have not been given the sufficient attention. There's a lot of people developing standards and a lot of work being done, but we need to be conscious of those collaboration development. And technology is changing. This is so impactful in BSF. We've been able to see different generations of processors and technologies, and we can test it. But it's also our responsibility to be able to transfer this knowledge to the rest of the community that is working in similar problems to ours, with air quality and weather, let's say, problems. And even though this is at the end of this, it's not least important, the industry engagement. And this I am speaking about the private and public sector. They do have a responsibility. We cannot subsist with state funding or public funding. Likewise, as the industry needs to invest in research, we are responsible of going to the industry and be able to communicate to them what part of our research can be useful for them, and to work hand in hand with them in the development of this technology that the industry can use and be profitable from the point of view, from the social or financial point of view. So this is